webinars. The title of today's webinar is Creating a Podcast to Engage the Public, which is the 9th broadcast of our Engaging the Public Through Science webinar series. I am Claudia Fracchiola, the APS Head of Public Engagement, and I'll be your host for today's broadcast. So thank you all so much for joining us. APS webinars are brought to you as a service for the American Physical Society, connecting you with the expertise of individuals who can offer insight into physics careers, educational programs, and professional development for students, working physicists, and educators. So if you're not a member yet, consider joining the APS membership, which gives you easy access to valuable career information and resources such as this webinar, but it also allows you to get your research out to the community, network with potential colleagues, employees on our meetings, and greater positive impact about issues that are important to you through many grassroots advocacy initiatives. It can also help you connect to a community of like-minded folks through participation in forums, divisions, and topical groups. So we highly encourage you to joining us. There is a link there or the QR code that you can use to access where memberships is. We will introduce our speakers in just a second, but first some housekeeping. So today's workshop will have our speakers discuss what is the process that we follow to create podcasts, the considerations they went through to determine that a podcast was a good medium to engage the public, and important tips and tricks to get you started on your own. If you have any questions, please type them on the Q&A board. That the link is on the chat, but also you can use the QR code to access it. You can submit questions at any time through this webinar, and we will do our best to address all of them during the webinar. But if not, we can get to those after the webinar. The webinar will be recorded, and we will publish the recording on the website after the workshop. You will also receive an email with a link to a quick survey, so please take a moment to give us feedback so that APS webinars can improve its ability to provide you with these valuable services. Lastly, before we dive in, I wanted to mention that there is a huge variety of talks prepared for this series, but also there's a new series working in the US, Career Development for International Physicists, that was just launched this month. You can learn about this series and other series and many opportunities through the webinars mailing list. So if you haven't signed up yet, you can do that through that code there, QR code or that link. And so with that, I will introduce our wonderful speakers. So Tamia Williams, she's a multi-hyphenated science communicator promoting inclusive and creative spaces within STEAM. She uses her knowledge of physics and background in performing art to translate science into works of art. Tamia is also a writer and a researcher, and you can see some of her published work at Physics World magazine, on the YouTube channel for Physics Girl, and on her blog. She's also the co-host of the podcast Gather, Round, and Grow, where she and her co-hosts discuss navigating life, exploring personal and professional growth, mental health, and topics from the collective. We also have Shelly Lesher. She's a professor and a chair of physics at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, with research focused on understanding the structure of nuclei. She's also interested in the intersection of physics and human rights and has served as the chair of APS Committee on International Freedom of Scientists. She works on developing the next generation of scientists and educating non-science majors, which includes hosting a podcast on the intersection of nuclear science and society called My Nuclear Life. And finally, Elias Aydi, and I probably mispronounced that, I'm sorry, is a research associate at the Physics and Astronomy Department at Michigan State University. Elias got his PhD in astronomy and astrophysics from the University of Cape Town and the South African Astronomical Observatory. His main research interests are time domain astronomy and multi-wavelength observation of explosive astronomical events. He is very interested in outreach and public engagement, and is also the host of the Lebanese Astro-Podcast. So with that, I will let our speakers start. So Tamia, I'll give you the floor. So I'll stop sharing now.
Alrighty. Thank you so much, Claudia, for that introduction. I'm very excited to be here and excited for this webinar. As stated before, my name is Tamia Williams. I am one of the co-hosts for the Gather Round and Grow podcast. It's a seasonal bi-weekly podcast that explores all things personal, as Claudia was saying before, personal, professional growth, and mental health. I just wanted to share a little bit more about the podcast and who I am and who my co-host is as well. So this is myself and my co-host, Destiny Williams. Dovis, we met in college. And so we decided to create this podcast post-college after we had graduated, and we're learning how to navigate the post-undergrad eras in our early 20s, mid 20s. And so we had noticed that we missed just being, just kind of communicating and being in the same spaces. So we wanted to create that in the form of a podcast. A few episodes that we have, we talk a lot that focus around Black Girl Joy, who gets to participate in Black Girl Magic. We also talk about a sense of belonging within grad school and mental health, because we are very strong advocates for making sure that we are taking care of ourselves. You can find our podcast mostly on Spotify, Apple Podcast, anywhere really where you get podcasts, you can find us. And then right now we are on a break. I don't know if this has changed. Did it change? Let's see. Let me go back. There we go. We are on a break. We take breaks during the summertime because we are also professionals outside of the podcast and what we do. But you could find us on our website at gatheroundandgrow.com. We'd love to hear from our listeners, so sending us feedback. We're also on social media and all of the streaming sites. So that's just a little bit, and I could get more into the creative adventures of why we came up with them later on in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamia. Shelly, you want to take the floor now?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I thank you for inviting me and letting me share my experience starting my podcast. I started my podcast for a different reason, which is I have been teaching a class at my university on the intersection of nuclear science and society. And it was called Navigating Global Nuclear Issues, which kind of took nuclear science and then introduced all these different subjects around it. So we talked about the history of nuclear science and how it impacted the world, like nuclear energy and, like I said, history, sociology, economics, kind of all of that. And I taught it primarily to science majors, and they would always say, like, why didn't anyone teach us how interesting and how impactful science was to the rest of the world? I took that class then to Yale in something called the impact of the atom. Now, when you're talking about how, say, nuclear policy or the way the way a subject impacts government or policy, it changes very, very quickly. And so people, of course, being academics, they said, well, you should write a book on your class. But because it changes so incredibly quickly, that's not a very good medium. So I decided to create a podcast, also because I'm not an expert in everything. I mean, I'm an expert in the nuclear science, but I'm not an expert in policy and sociology and economics and history. So it was a way for me to talk to people that I thought were fascinating, be able to then share that information. Undergraduates are extremely interested in this intersection on how they can use science to impact the world. And so this seemed like a perfect way to do it. It also gave me great material for my class later on. So the reason I chose to do it now, so I've been thinking about it for years, but when I looked, there was really nothing similar out there that I mean, there were policy podcasts and there were science podcasts, but there was nothing that combined everything. And COVID was a really good excuse. Everybody was at home, nobody was traveling. And so I could get really big names on my podcast because they were just interested in talking. And because there was no travel, I had extra money in my NSF grant. So it was so much easier for me to start it because I could pay people to do the things that I didn't want to do. So I didn't want to do the audio editing because I have no idea how to do that. And I didn't want to take the time out because it's really, I mean, it's time consuming to learn how to audio edit and make it sound good. I didn't want to figure out music. I didn't want to figure out art. So I just paid someone to do all of that for me because I had this travel money in my NSF grant. And the NSF decided that it was a really, really great idea and they loved the podcast. So it worked out really well for me. And so my podcast is called My Nuclear Life, which does take into account kind of the ways that nuclear science has impacted our lives in beneficial and destructive ways. And I use interviews to do this. So I did a bunch of interviews and I dropped my first 6 episodes in December. And then starting in March, I started releasing episodes every other week. And that schedule worked really well because then my listeners know exactly when to expect episodes. And just to give you kind of an idea about what my episodes are like, my most popular ones is I had Pulitzer Prize winning author Richard Rhodes I spoke to him a 3-part series on making the atomic bomb. I had a couple that just released a book on atomic tunes. So we talked about how the atomic bomb had influenced music throughout the ages, the intersection of queer theory and nuclear with Martin Pfeiffer. And then the first episode I did was saving the world with nuclear energy, using microreactors and kind of new nuclear energy technology. So that's kind of a flavor. Some of them are more technical. Some of them are very, very not technical. I just will approach anyone I think is interesting. And in fact, I asked Jimmy Carter, but received a very, very nice rejection letter, which I think will probably go on my website. Like a physical rejection letter. It was really sweet. Anyway, so that's my podcast and why I came to do it. And it's been a lot of fun, but it is time consuming. It helps if you can farm out pretty much anything you possibly can to stay on schedule. So thank you.
Thank you, Shelly. Elias, will you take the floor, please?
Okay, can you hear me well? Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you for your invite to participate in this panel. My name is Elias Aydi. I'm a research associate at Michigan State University, and I am the host of the podcast called Lebanese Astro-Podcast. I started this podcast in the year of 2016, particularly for one specific reason, which is the lack of any scientific or astronomy content for like outreach or public engagement in Arabic. So there's plenty of content online on YouTube, on Facebook, everywhere in English or in different languages, but there was really a lack of content using Arabic language. And since I'm from Lebanon and Arabic is my native language, I decided to create this podcast. And it was the first channel in the Arab world to offer astronomy content in simple Arabic language. My main aim was to offer the public, and particularly the youth in the Middle East and the Arab world, an alternative to the daily negative news and environment and all the stress that they are experiencing every day. And because there's really a niche audience for me, or I'm targeting only people who can understand Arabic and also people who might be a little bit enthusiastic about science or astronomy. Instead of typical podcasts, I decided to create a more light content for only few minutes, videos of, or like interviews for 5 minutes or 10 minutes maximum, to appeal to a wider range of the public and not only people who like astronomy and who would like sit for half an hour and listen to a podcast about astronomy. And I chose Facebook and didn't go to YouTube because it is the widely used platform in the in the country, in Lebanon, and the Arab world. So for YouTube, Twitter were not that popular back in 2016 for like scientific content or stuff like this. My format is usually either short videos where I talk about a variety of topics in astronomy. Usually these videos are 5 minutes plus or minus 2 minutes, and usually I found that the shorter the video is, the more views I get on them. And my other format is doing actually interviews, more like typical podcasts with hosts that are either colleagues or peers. And recently we did a series of episodes with the female Lebanese astronomers to try to promote astronomy for younger women and girls in the Middle East. And there was really an overwhelming interest in the channel, particularly for this type of interviews. So the channel was featured on TV, on national TV multiple times. It was ranked or like voted top 5 channels worth following in Lebanon and the Arab world, actually. And the most important part for me is that it inspires several others to start creating astronomy and scientific content through videos and podcasts in Arabic. And that was the main aim for me, is to increase the amount of content that speaks in Arabic online. And a lot of people now are creating such content I'm collaborating with, and we work together to try to increase this type of content, despite the really difficult situation now in the Middle East and in Lebanon particularly. Thank you.
So thank you to our 3 panelists. So the format, it will be that I have some pre-prepared questions that I will ask us speakers, but if you have any questions that you would like the speakers to speak about, please post it on the Padlet board, which we have shared the link in the chat. So you all 3 sort of mentioned what was your initial idea to decide to create a podcast, but how do you know whether the topic that you are interested in, it's an appropriate topic for the format of a podcast? And within, podcasts, there's, as Elias and Shelly mentioned, there's like varieties of styles of podcasts where it's like a conversational, interviews or other styles. How do you make a decision on, is this appropriate for this medium? I don't know who wants to take the lead on that. Shelly?
Yeah, I'll start. For me, because mine came out of a class, I knew that I wasn't the expert on all the topics I wanted to discuss. And after teaching the class for 5 years, I had all these questions, all these great questions that students had asked me and I couldn't answer. So I really wanted to make use of outside experts. Now, I could have done a whole lot of research and done an episode where it was 20 or 30 minutes and I had written a script and I had read it. Now, I'm really, really bad at that, and it takes a whole lot of time. So for me, it was just, if I was going to get this done, I had to do the route that was easier for me to do, which was to actually do the research to interview someone, and then have it be more of a conversation, which I think is a lot more fun to listen to with this topic than it was for me just reading off a script. Now, some people can make reading off a script really, really entertaining. I know myself, and I am not one of those people. Now, it turns out that when preparing to do an interview, I probably land up doing just as much research as I would if I were to just do the research and read off a script. But it's more fun when I can actually talk to someone. But I think it's an individual choice, honestly.
Tamia, Elias, you wanna?
Yeah, I will jump in. I agree. So for my podcast, because it's the two, because I have a co-host, it's very easy to have these conversations. And I think part of what the topics and why we kind of choose these topics is because regularly when we talk on the phone, we'll say, you know, like, this is something that keeps reoccurring in our lives, whether it be like dealing with, you know, academia and how to navigate that, or learning how to network, or whether it just be about how we are feeling, and the resources that we're looking for. We kind of just decided, like, why don't we just take those conversations and kind of put them out into the world? We don't necessarily have a specific audience who we engage with. We mostly really do want to focus on BIPOC people of color. And so we knew that coming as two Black women, we've got other people as well to come on to our podcast who kind of share different outlooks of the topic, so that we can have an array of voices that might speak to those particular conversations and experiences. Mm-hmm.
Okay. For me, the case is that I was a bit doubtful initially that people with everything happening in the Middle East would be interesting to hear about astronomy. But what made me motivated to start this is that, or like to choose astronomy and talk about it in these videos and podcasts, is that I felt that so I was posting a lot on my social media about astronomy in general, like outreach photos or like posts, and I was getting a lot of messages from people asking me about this. Oh, there's something in the news, like, we know the news usually exaggerate anything. So if there's like a flyby asteroid that is flying by Earth, I don't know how many million miles away, they would say, oh, an asteroid is going to hit Earth tomorrow. And people like message me, what's happening? Is that true? Is truly an asteroid is going to hit Earth? And I was like, okay, maybe people are interested in this topic. Astronomy is an appealing topic in general. So I decided to start make few episodes, and then a year later I found myself 25th episode, and then kept going. So I felt like people were enthusiastic, and astronomy is still appealing for a group of people that are going through a lot. So that was good. Yeah.
With that, I want to address something that was mentioned in the chat, which is like, how do you measure success in your podcast? And I think all three of us have kind of a niche in the podcast world. So we're never going to hit like millions of downloads in a month, right? But like, I think we can safely say we all love what we do. And it's so specialized that, you know, if you just hit a few people that are interested and you appeal to a few people, then that makes it worth it. But the metrics for success in podcast lingo are number of downloads. And, you know, how many downloads do you get per episode determines how successful you are. And if that's the only metrics you go by, then you're going to drive yourself insane, because you're always hitting refresh. Like, how many downloads? Is this a successful episode? And if that's all you go by, then you're going to get discouraged very quickly and you're going to stop. But it takes a long time to build up a following to your podcast, because there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and the more specialized you are, the harder it is to get that following. But once you get a following, then you do have a good set of people. I mean, I have a following in Denver, and I don't even know anyone in Denver, so I have no idea how they came across my podcast. So we all have like these little pockets that you don't know how they got there, but so I don't know if anyone else wants to add about like metrics or like why you do it. Sorry,
Yeah.
Claudia, I kind of took over, but that came from the posts.
Oh, no, that's fine. Because I was actually gonna, it's very aligned with the next question that I have, which is one of the things that I discussed a lot in public engagement is the need to, constantly check with people of what is that you're doing, why are you doing it, and how it's being received. And I feel like podcast is one that it's very hard to maybe have that type of feedback or interaction, which for me would be a good measurement of success, like how do you get that constant feedback from, and then you adopt it. So like, Tamia, do you want to add something to that?
Yes, I would say I agree 100% with Shelly, right? When I went into the podcast realm, I didn't necessarily say, okay, I'm looking to get all these people to follow me, because I knew that wasn't a logical expectation of how I wanted to measure or how I wanted to produce a work of art, because, you're kind of producing a work of art in a way. And I think when it comes to feedback, right, we try to use social media as well as emails, right? We send people messages. We try to engage our own friends and send them messages and say, hey, check out this new episode. What do you think of it? How can we improve? So we're always asking our peers and our community for that feedback to help us when it comes to engaging. And I think over time too, when you listen back to the podcast, if you do, because I do, part of it, when Shelly, you were saying how you don't do audio production, I do everything. So it's literally like our podcast is literally like started from just the two of us working together to do audio production, add in music, cut. But that's also something that I enjoy, because it's another skill set that I developed. So, but part of listening back, you say, okay, maybe I didn't like how I said something here, or how I could, or just, little things that you wish you had added on before. So also listening back, that also helps in that aspect for feedback.
Yeah, same for me. Like the metric, usually I look for the number of views to see if this episode was a good hit, but particularly the engagement with people, I get every time I post a video, I get 10 to 20, sometimes 30 messages on the channel as people asking about the topic or want more information. And that's what I think is the most important, is the engagement. Sometimes I don't always have time to reply as fast as possible. And the other thing that I really like is that sometimes if I don't post for a week or two, people would start messaging me and, hey, where are you? We haven't heard from you in a while. We haven't seen any video recently. Are you okay? What's happening? I'll be like, I'm just busy with life and work. Sorry, but I'll try to post something soon. But yeah, this for me, the engagement is more engagement with people. If I can have actual interaction with the follower through messaging, or even sometimes people ask me, can I call you, ask you some questions? And this is, I think, the fun part of it, rather than hitting a certain number of views. Of course, we always aim to have more views, but for me, the interaction with the people is the most valuable part of it.
So from the moment you said, oh, I want to do a podcast, to when you actually launch your first episode, so what are the things that go in between there? And then, and then when you get brave enough to say, hey, I'm going to put it out to the world. Do you have is there a logical steps? Is it kind of procedural specific structure, or is a as we go we learn process? And then also, you said something about the frequency. That is also something that you decide that based on, how busy you are. Do you know, have you read about other podcasts and what is the optimal frequency that they have? Those kind of decisions that needs to be in place probably by the time you decide to actually put this stuff out there.
Right. I will answer first this follow-up question as well. So for me, the first episode I did, I sent it to a few friends. and to few people I know who work in media and video production, and asked them what do they think. And they gave me some feedback and improved it a little bit. And I recorded another one. And then I decided to put it out there and see what would be the feedback. And I think it was like the first episode was very I got very good feedback, so I decided to keep going with it. The frequency for me, I'm the one, like I'm the only host of the podcast. I do everything from video editing to posting everything. So it's basically mostly dependent on how busy I am with my research and life and other stuff. So I try to be as much frequent as possible, but sometimes it's just impossible. It takes a lot of preparation for each episode and a lot of post work on the processing and editing and stuff. So yeah, it's mostly dependent on my life schedule. And also if there are anything like urgent in the news, like there's the Mars meteorite rover landing on Mars, something like this, I try to like put something urgent on the same day to talk about this topic. That's what I try to usually do.
I would say for us, when we first started, so we started our podcast in December of 2020. And we just kind of sat down and said, okay, how long do we want to talk? Because I think that also is a point, like, do you want a 2-hour podcast, an hour podcast, 45 minutes? Those metrics are important as well. We were both in grad school, so we knew that we wouldn't have it in our schedules to do it every week. So we decided bi-weekly would be a better time, because we can plan accordingly. And we usually record, I would say, like a Friday evening. So when it's very low stress, and then when it came to editing, that usually took me, if it's an hour podcast, maybe 3 hours. So I knew that I had to schedule like that amount of time to do all of that work. And then my co-host would manage like posting and kind of doing more of the publicity side. So we found a balance between those two. But I think really when it just came to deciding to have the podcast, we just kind of sat down on Zoom and said, all right, let's just record and see where the conversation goes. And then over time we say, okay, well, I would like us to talk more about like how we can like check in with each other and making that a habit, kind of setting some type of structure within our own episodes for every other week.
So I'm a planner, so I have a schedule. And I have everything laid out, like when things have to be done at what point in time. And I really enjoy the podcasting. So even with all my other jobs, it kind of it still rises to the top because it's how I learn. And even though I pay someone to do the actual like cutting of the audio, I still have a transcript that I have to go through and, cut the text. And I mean, because my interviews sometimes last 3 hours and I got to get them down to an hour. So I have to go through and I have to cut and edit the transcript so that they know what to physically cut. That part does make it easier because I don't have to fiddle with the audio, but it does help to pay people to do as much as you possibly can if you don't have time. Now, the problem is that when time and money are inversely proportional, right? Doing it all yourself does take a lot more time, because when you're trying to do things inexpensively, the more inexpensive your hosting platform is, the more you have to do. The more expensive it is, the less you have to do. So it's really, really hard. And I will say I'm extremely fortunate that I had money to spend on the podcast. Even with that though, I still spend my own money on the podcast because there's things, I mean, my hosting for my web page, I pay for myself. There's a lot of things that I pay out of my own money. And I think all of us, you're not making money on podcasting unless you have millions of downloads. And I don't think any of us have millions of downloads. I think the average podcast has 100 downloads per episode. That's the average. So you're not getting sponsorship with that. So this is a way to share your passion and to teach the world something. It's not a way to bring in big bucks. Now, what keeps me going is not just learning new things, but it is that 90% of my audience is under the age of 35. So I am hitting my target population. Undergrads are listening to me, like people that are young are listening to me, and that's who I want to hit. Now, the process for me starting my podcast was that I wanted to drop 6 episodes at once. And so I lined up people that I knew to talk to. So I talked to friendly faces first, and then had everything drop at once so I could just kind of like see how things went. Now, in retrospect, that probably wasn't the best thing, because then I had a big lull before I started releasing episodes again. So I should have probably dropped like 3 and then start releasing them on a schedule. What I found from talking to podcasters and kind of doing the research is that it doesn't matter what your schedule is. Fans, like people who listen to your podcast, want a schedule. So if you can only commit to once a month, then say you're going to release the first day of every month. I release every other Tuesday, and I release every other Tuesday. So right now I've got like 3 in the hopper, so I'm good for the summer. But I just keep going because I don't know when I'm going to hit the time that I'm not going to have time to record something. So in the summer I have time, and so I'm probably going to have stuff ready until the end of the year, so that during the school year and I don't have time to record stuff or do the research, then I have a backlog. But I mean, it just depends on what you can do. But if you can only commit to once a month, then only commit to once a month, but commit to what you can do, because people like knowing when it's coming out. And that's the way you're going to keep your following, is that people know when stuff is going to happen.
So that's very interesting that there were a couple of questions that I want to unpack from that. So you talk about the time commitment and inversely proportional to the money. And that's something that a lot of people are asking questions. So kind of really, if you are, the 3 of you are sort of comfortable saying more or less how much it takes you to create one episode, and then, expenses that you had to go through, and, going from the more basic to maybe like how you made it work and it establish type of thing.
Yeah, I can go first. For me, preparing for an episode start with most of the topics, of course, I'm familiar with. They're about astronomy, but still I need to prepare. So I sit and read for like an hour or so. And then I actually, if I want to have a concise video where I'm not having like conversation with someone, I usually write down the entire thing. Just to be as concise as possible, as clear as possible. And because I'm speaking science in Arabic, which is not my thing. I went to school in Lebanon, which is French. Most schools are either French or English schools. We don't have science in Arabic. I went to French or English universities as well. So I only learned to talk science in English and French. And therefore, for me, talking science in Arabic was a first. Never done that before. So it took me a lot of time to prepare and be able to find the exact terms and words, scientific terms in Arabic language. And then after that, I record a few times to make sure that everything is good. And then comes the editing later and the post-processing. So in general, one episode takes around 3 to 4 hours of work, everything total. But the expenses are also part of it, as Shelly said. Most of the time it's from our own pocket. So for me, I'm on Facebook, so that I don't have to pay for a server or a website. But at some point in end of year 2016, Facebook decided to change its algorithm of how pages reach their followers, and they decided to monetize that. So if you don't pay money, you're not going to reach more than a couple of % of your followers. So you have to pay to pay money, or you need to present a content that everyone would love to share, and then when they share it, you'd reach more followers. So this one thing was going for me, that I got a lot of shares on my videos, but at some point I started to have to pay to reach the followers that usually ask me, why are you not posting videos? Like, no, the videos are posted, but unfortunately Facebook is not allowing you to see them because I'm not paying money. So I was a student and I started paying money, maybe 10, 20 bucks for each video. And at some point I couldn't do it anymore. So I decided to stop for a few months. And then I got a lot of messages from people asking, please come back. And I got some people helping me in that. Some people that I know, they said, okay, I'll contribute here, contribute there. And I decided to pick it up again. Now I'm more financially stable position than a graduate student, so I can afford to put a little bit of money to reach my followers. But yeah, unfortunately, most of it from my own pocket, and we make zero money from these podcasts.
Tamia?
Yeah. So I'm lucky enough that I have a co-host, so a lot of the financial burden is not as big as it might seem. But we use an RSS feed. We use Simplecast, which is about $15 a month. And it allows you to get on major streaming platforms, like I said, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I think like Amazon Podcasts, iHeartRadio. So you have all of these different platforms that you have access to, and you can pay $15. So splitting that it's pretty cheap for me to do, about $7 a month. We also have a website, which again, I'm able to split it. You don't have to have a website, but I think we like to have it just as a resource for people to check out how they can send us in feedback. And we also have a PayPal account where you can, if you want to, you can donate money to. You can also do crowdsourcing. So that's how we really are able to keep up with the financial side of our podcast. But I would say it's about 3 to 4 hours of just planning for us, maybe bi-weekly, depends on what we want to do. If it's more focused on just the two of us, we come up with topics in like half an hour, and then we kind of already have a schedule of like, we start with a check-in, then we go to what's happening in pop culture, then we really talk about our main topic, and then we end off with affirmations or other things, news such as such. So that can kind of be done in an hour and a half. So we've kind of gotten it down to that point where we know what to expect, so that we're not necessarily going in blindly about the ways in which we kind of communicate with our audience.
So I'm probably at the high end of both time and money. I'm writing a grant to fund 6 episodes. So there are grants out there if you're doing science communication kind of things. So I worked it out. My episodes, including web hosting and editing and like everything, site, like just everything that is included, is about $315 an episode. So that's kind of the high side if you want someone to edit and post because I don't post my stuff. I just tell them to do it, and they do it automatically. And they've set up all the RSS feeds, and it's pretty easy for me. As far as time, I think I probably did the episode recently that cost me the most time, which was the intersection of computing and nuclear science. And I know nothing about computing. So I had to read 2 of the guy's books. So, reading 2 books about computer science is not my thing. I mean, I skimmed a few chapters, but however it takes you to read 2 books, it took me a couple weeks. And then I had a pre-interview with him that took a couple hours. And then the interview with him took a couple hours. And I'm still editing the transcript because it's really, really long and complicated. So that's probably going to take me another 4 or 5 hours. And then the podcast company, the company will do the audio edit, and then I have to listen to that and make additional edits. And then, so his episode's probably, it's going to be a good 15, 20, 30 hours of work on that. Now, I enjoy the reading. I mean, perhaps I enjoy the reading, not as much as I enjoyed reading Midnight in Chernobyl, which is a New York Times bestseller, and talking to Adam Higginbotham, which was like, extremely fun for me to do. But I mean, it's going to be a really good episode, but it just depends. It just depends. I mean, some people I don't have to prep for at all. Some people I prep for. I mean, I can spend an hour doing an interview and, there's no audio editing. But I mean, if you do a podcast that is, like Elias could probably find grants to apply for, but then it takes time to apply for those grants. And if you do that, then you need to know how much per episode you're spending. So it's kind of all over the place.
So touching on that, because there's been questions also like, what are the minimum equipment that you would need to just get you started? And I know that I started listening to Brené Brown's podcast when she launched it. She said that at the beginning she was using Zoom on her computer or her phone. So what do you think is like the minimum equipment that you would need? And then some recommendations that you have. Okay, yes, you can do it like just with your Zoom computer, but what thing that you can buy will really increase the quality but not like break your bank account?
I would not use your phone. There is nothing worse than listening to the first episode of the podcast and have the audio quality be so bad that you never want to go back. I know people do it, but just don't do it. Invest in a good microphone. Just spend $50, get a good microphone. Just invest the $50 for a new microphone.
I agree. I'd say a microphone, some, decent pair of headphones. If you have a Mac, that I use Garageband. You could just use that to audio edit if you really don't have like the funds to do to get outside help when it comes to audio production. YouTube University. Go online, research which microphones are good, how to use certain tools in GarageBand so that you can learn. It's pretty simple. And then again, I use Zoom to record most of my videos, so that's easy. I can record it and then I just drag the audio into GarageBand and sit there and edit.
Yeah, I would say the same. Good mic. I use a DSLR cam to record my videos, or fake 4K webcam. I'm into photography, so I already had the gear before starting the podcast. One thing was even if you don't have a DSLR camera, just for the video, if you have any video in your or some interview and you want to show the faces, you can use your phone. I think the phones now that are present, they can record at 40K with 60 frames per second. So that's even better than a DSLR sometimes. And some of them are some new phones have up to 108 megapixel cameras. So that's really good. The audio, it's not that perfect. So get a mic and use your phone for recording video. That should be fine, and reduce the cost instead of buying a DSLR camera.
So one more question regarding finances, and this is something that I'm really interested in. It's do you offer some sort of reward or payment to your speakers, or how do you get your speakers to participate? Shelly, you had a good story about a rejection letter from former President Carter. How do you do that?
I have a template that I send out. I have a fact sheet I made a fact sheet about the podcast, about who the audience is, who, with the logo, and I have some information about that. And then I send out a letter I send out an email about why I want the person on the podcast, what the podcast is, who I am, why I want them on the show, what they would bring. And then I also say right at the bottom, right at the end, I say, this is an educational podcast. I am not making money off this. So therefore I cannot offer you any financial compensation. So I say it right there. And like I said, I've had New York Times best-selling authors, and they're fine. They don't care about I mean, I guess some of them do, but Jimmy Carter just didn't have time. I mean, he's like 95 or something. But I mean, I've only been rejected twice. Him and then a Nobel laureate said not this year, maybe next year. But those are the only two people who have said no. And no one else has offered. I mean, because it's an educational podcast, they don't seem to be bothered. But I also let them, I also advertise their book, or, you know, a lot of times people have written a book, and so then I'll link their book into the podcast if somebody wants to buy it.
You're muted.
Classic Zoom stuff. Anyone else wants to add to that, or?
Claudia, you're muted when you started talking.
Yeah.
I'll just say, for us, that's the same thing. We would like to offer financial compensation for any of our guests, but because we are graduate students, we don't have it. And but a lot of our peers are just kind of willing to just come on, and we do the same thing. We share their businesses, we share where we can find them, or just figuring out how we can support them in other ways. If it's, you know, our time, they need help with a project, like we'll do that. But mostly people are willing to just come and collaborate with you. They're not often looking to be compensated in that way. Yeah. Especially if they're having fun on the podcast, which we try to do.
Idea?
Yeah, I would say just the same as that. Like, I've never offered, and people are just, I think, happy to contribute. I try to promote either the research, their outreach, if they're doing any outreach, their publications, if they have any like book or something, that the articles that they're putting out, stuff like this. So yeah, but people are generally happy to contribute, especially that they know that we're not making any money out of it. So yeah, it's just to, like, as Shelly said, it's just educational podcast.
So we only have time for 2 more questions. So I'm gonna ask. So the first one is related. So how have you done to like market your podcast? Where have you, been reaching out to your audiences? Like, do you do it through your website only, or do you engage in other social media platforms to promote your podcast? And how do you do it in a way that you know you're targeting the right audience that you want to target? Shelly, you want to start?
I'm really bad at this, but when my podcast first came out, by the PR people at my university just kind of like blasted all the physics sites and organizations and anything to do with nuclear. And so they advertised my podcast when it first came out. And then I have a Twitter. And when I have an episode that involves someone, like I just had an episode about LIGO, so then I tag LIGO, and I mean, that's it. I need to do better at that, but I just don't have time. I need a student to take over the social media aspect, but that's one thing. I mean, something has to give, and that's what's been dropped.
For me, I also use mostly social media to promote for it. My Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. But one thing that I tried initially, I thought worked well, is that I tried to contact some people I know they work in TV channels, and tell them, look, I have this thing that's been going on. Would you like to cover it in your program? And one person did it, and then I'm sure other TVs saw it, and then they started picking it up, and each one started to feature it on like some program, or asked me to join like an interview to talk about it. And it's been covered for most like national TV channels in Lebanon, and that I think worked out, and also some other Arabic channels. So yeah, this is one thing that I thought helped. And also, like, there's these news websites where like you can offer them to write an article, and also like advertise your own thing as well. And sometimes people are happy to do that and feature it. So yeah.
Yes, it's mostly through social media. Twitter and Instagram. We also share it with friends. We are looking to kind of expand. So because we have the website, we might do where we have subscribers where we'll send them emails. So things that would kind of take that kind of publicity off of our hands. It's social media is a hard one because it's like you have to really know how to learn and engage, and it can be very tiring at times. So I think again, like that is usually the last thing that falls off for us too, because after recording and editing and all that other stuff, you're like, yeah, it's there. But using hashtags, trying to tag people who have been in the episode, trying to share it with other podcast platforms so that they might also to share your work. I think that's how we are looking to just engage and get other people to listen and be involved.
So I want to add that I just recently did a crossover episode with another podcast. And so that I hope brings some followers to both of our podcasts, but I think that's a really good way to do it too. So, finding someone who does something similar and then you go on each other's podcast and kind of connect it. So they do conspiracy theories. So we did an old nuclear project and kind of did that on each other's podcast. So, it's a way to open up your audience and expose them to something different and help each other out.
And we will have a how to use social media to promote your research webinar next week. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can